Well, probably like all of us here at ITV News, you have been pondering over the course of the last couple of days what we saw at the end of last week in the White House. It was impossible to watch that video and think of this American leadership as reliable allies in the defense of Europe as things stand. Certainly in the defense of Ukraine, they're pretty upfront about that, but also potentially when it comes to NATO. Where does it leave us? That's the big and very, very big question which we've assembled our finest brains here to try and analyse and assess tonight. Emma Murphy, our international editor, Robert Peston, our political editor, and Dan in the US, our Washington correspondent. Dan, let's begin with you. I guess one question I've had over the last couple of days is, we know MAGA loyalists have rode in behind Donald Trump and J.D. Vance on this. I'm sure Democrats were horrified. To what extent, is there any way of assessing what Americans more broadly think? You know, you live there. Do you get any sense of that at all?
Well, I live in the bubble, in the Washington bubble, so I think most of my anecdotal evidence over the weekend would be skewed more to a sort of progressive point of view. But I think, look, this is a profoundly divided country, as we know from the results of the election. That, as you mentioned, there will be the hardcore MAGA base who will have been cheering this on, frankly, who would probably want to go further and just, you know, completely pull any kind of support for Ukraine going forward and let Europe get on with it. I think, though, there will be some who voted maybe slightly reluctantly for Donald Trump at the last election, maybe on economic grounds or because they were appalled about the idea of a Kamala Harris presidency, who now are reassessing in light of this and will be really uneasy with the tone, with the language, with the demeanour of the president, with this kind of unseemly, undignified row in the Oval Office, and will be wondering, look, we're only 1 month into this second Trump term. Is this really what we wanted? And you know, there may be a degree of buyer's remorse, I suspect, among some of the more moderate Trump supporters.
Robert, you've just come back from the press conference with Keir Starmer, and I noticed the first two questions, Beth Rigby was asking, was the US now an unreliable ally? And you then asked, was the effect of, do we have to consider ourselves as, you know, effectively moving towards hostilities with Moscow or words? Words to that effect. I mean,
no, that was what I said.
But these are big things for us to get. Oh, yeah, okay. Thank you for correcting me. I was listening. These are big things, very, very, very big things for us to get our head around. Where do you think we are? Where does Keir Starmer? I mean, he said he thought the US was a reliable ally. Does he think that?
Look, the hard truth is right now, we can't do without American military backing to maintain the peace in Ukraine. Everything that Europe's doing at the moment is designed to free ourselves of that dependence on America, but that is going to be the work of years because we cannot ramp up, you know, spending, troop numbers, arms manufacturing in a matter of days and weeks. And so we are in this really nerve-wracking period where we are trying to convince Donald Trump, when I say we, I mean the UK and Europe, that we are committed to taking more responsibility for our own defence. And so you do have what is an historic and frankly anxiety-inducing statement by Keir Starmer that he is prepared to risk the lives of British soldiers by putting them into Ukraine to defend the peace, right? And, you know, in our lifetimes, we have not deployed British soldiers within Europe against the threat from a country like Russia, not since the Second World War. So this is all really momentous stuff. But Starmer's position is we can only agree some kind of peace deal and put our troops on the ground if we think that we have the resources that would deter Putin from encroaching again, from invading again. And I'm afraid all the intelligence that he has been given is that if President Putin is not prepared to give us American air cover in the worst case of Putin starting hostilities again, if he's not prepared to let us use their long-range missile technology, and if they're not prepared to share their intelligence with us, that is what this backstop, this guarantee all amounts to. If they're not prepared to do that, our soldiers would be at too great a risk. And so everything that's going on at the moment is designed to build confidence with Trump that he will give that guarantee, and we'll see what we're doing as a step along the road, so that, I don't know, in 5 years' time or something, we are in a position to defend ourselves without them. But right now, I'm afraid the harsh reality is there will be no sustainable peace unless unless Trump gives that commitment, gives that guarantee. And I just ought to very quickly map out for you what will happen if we don't get peace and we don't get that guarantee. What will actually happen, in my view, and this is depressing, is the war will rumble on, but with less resource coming from America, and ultimately, Ukraine will capitulate. And it will become a client vassal state like Belarus. So, the stakes are incredibly high right now.
Emma, you've reported very often from Ukraine, from the front line. You know the country very well. Can I ask you to just comment on that, whether you agree with Robert that Ukraine is doomed if the US doesn't support it, or whether it's not as simple as that? And also, many people will think the EU, I can't remember the exact figures, but that it keeps being quoted that it's a population of 500 million. It certainly does have the third largest GDP in the world. Russia's GDP is the size of Italy's. Why is Europe in no position to assist Ukraine without American support?
Well, let's start at the first point of your question, which is, do I agree with Robert about what could happen to Ukraine? Yes, very much so. And there's no doubt the Ukrainians are very, very fearful of that. I spent some time over the last 24 hours with members of the Ukrainian delegation who'd been in Washington, who were here in London. And to say they were shaken would be an understatement. They were absolutely rocked by what had gone on. And they were people who had already been incredibly concerned about the situation. I mean, they've lived through 3 years of full-scale invasion. They've been in a state of war at one level or another since 2014. They're people who are not new to this game, but they could not believe just how bad the last few weeks have been. And, over the months that we've been in and out of Ukraine, we've heard over and over again that they were very worried about Trump. But I think there was an attempt to put on a sort of brave face and say, well, Biden's not been that brilliant. He hasn't been terribly supportive all the time. This could be new blood, new opportunities, new chances for us to really push forward and get this peace. And, they went along with that view of Donald Trump, the deal maker. So this could change things on the ground. This could change the reality for this country. And, I think that feels like a very hollow false hope. And false hope is a really false friend. And I think that's where they feel that they are at this point, and with, from what we've seen, with really good reason. Nobody thinks that they can continue without American support. Yeah, there's all the chat and the bravado about, well, we started this on our own, we were on our own at the beginning. But even with all the support they've had, this has gone on for as long as it has, and they are not making progress. This war is in a terrible, terrible position for Ukraine. And if they don't have the American support, even if they had increased and sustained European support, they are not going to continue. So then we move on to what does that mean for the country? Yes, potentially they do end up as a vassal state. They lose their sovereignty. They lose everything that so many people in that country have been looking for, fighting for, dying for. You have got such huge death toll, a death toll that is there because people wanted to change the direction of that country. Those deaths will all be in vain. All the sacrifices that have been made, the people who've had to leave that country, it will be all for nothing if this falls apart now. And then just to pick up on the second part of your question about, why is there such an issue with European provision, what Europe can do without America, it's basically all down to money. The money has not been put into defence. After the Cold War, there was that real reduction in spending. There was a belief that there was no need. I think there was also a degree of complacency that, that lovely big umbrella of America was over everybody and going to keep everybody nice and dry and safe. And this is a reminder that you actually can't rely on anybody. And now you certainly can't rely on America. And I think although Keir Starmer today was pushed on whether or not he trusted Donald Trump, he gave a very diplomatic answer. He's not going to say no, is he, at this point? I don't think anybody could trust an administration that they've seen do what they've done in the last few days and have spoken very clearly. It's not as if America are trying to hide their position. Donald Trump was elected on a policy of America first. He has said he doesn't want the American taxpayers' money to be wasted. The US Secretary of State has been very clear that, America's taxpayers' money is to be counted dollar by dollar. And they don't want to be paying Europe. The problem for Europe is they've not got the money in the bank at the moment, and they don't want to spend it even if they have. I mean, we've heard so much today about this coalition of the willing. That coalition of the willing, if it's going to succeed, is going to be a big lot of money spent. And, the UK has said, OK, we'll increase our defence spending to 2.5%, but that's by 2027. We're in 2025 and we're facing a really very serious crisis. If they were to dig deep and have to deliver the amount of money that they would need to, I'm not sure there would be a coalition of the willing, and I'm not sure the money's actually there. And it's not just the same thing as putting the cash in. There's also the capability. Europe has not at this moment got the capability. There's a lag between putting the money in and actually getting the weaponry, the intelligence services, all the things that America is so crucial in providing.
Dan, can I ask you, what do you think Trump really wants out of this? Is this situation salvageable? I mean, on one level, when you look at what he does and what he says, there is a kind of logic to it. He's not really interested, it seems, in kind of moral leadership and things like that. He's certainly not interested, particularly as far as I can see, in the defence of Western Europe, which he thinks should be a matter for the Europeans. Seems to be drawn to strong leaders, even if they're dictators, because they wield the kind of power that he likes to wield. And from his point of view, I guess there's a certain logic to it. He sees Russia as an important, potential ally. If he can improve relations with Russia, there may be economic benefits. He may be able to pull Russia away from China. I mean, there is a certain logic to it. So how much of it do you think is about that logic, and how much of it is just his personal characteristics and he doesn't like Zelensky? Could you paint us a sort of picture of where you think Donald Trump is really coming from in all of this?
Well, I think he views this in transactional terms. He is very exercised about the amount of money that America has paid with regard to Europe, a figure that he gets wrong all the time and has been corrected on twice in the last week by President Macron and Prime Minister Starmer, and again by President Zelensky as well. But he feels like America has spent a lot more defending Ukraine, and Europe should be stepping up more. He feels that this minerals deal is a key part to sort of clawing back some of that money. He feels that will also help potentially to put American firms in Ukraine, if not American boots on the ground, and that may provide some stability. But the problem with all this is it's a long way off getting any of these rare earth minerals out of the ground. Many of them anyway are actually in the Russian control bit of the Donbass as it stands. So no one's really explained from an American administration point of view, how is this going to work? This could take 10 years for them to actually start exploiting some of these minerals. And a lot can happen in 10 years. A lot can frankly happen in a month at the current pace of events. So I think he's looking at it from that transactional point of view. He's also looking at it from a domestic point of view, a nativist point of view. He thinks that his priority should be tax cuts for the American people. He doesn't want to be spending billions of dollars sending arms to Ukraine. He feels, frankly, as he keeps on saying, there's a big, beautiful ocean between us and Europe. It's Europe's problem. We've got other things we need to focus on, like the southern border, like creating jobs, bringing down inflation and cutting taxes. And that is going to be his priority. And frankly, I think he feels that, if Europe won't step up, then that's their problem.
Robert, how you've been speaking to Starmer's officials, and they're obviously very plugged in to the White House, trying very hard to make this work. What do you think the chances of Trump coming back on stream, given everything that Dan's just said?
So the British belief is that if you flatter him enough, if you constantly say this is your brilliant deal. So Peter Mandelson goes on ABC television this morning and says he wants, just to remind people, Peter Mandelson is Starmer's personal appointee as the new ambassador in Washington. And Peter Mandelson, as is always the case when he's in government, he's plugged into everything at the moment, right? So this is not Peter Mandelson just freelancing, right? And so Peter Mandelson says on television this morning, he wants European leaders and Zelensky to give, his words, unequivocal backing to President Trump's peace deal, right? He also says, and by the way, it would be a really good idea if President Zelensky announces a ceasefire first in order to defy Putin into then following suit, right? Now, people listening to this podcast will think, my God, this is absolutely outrageous. One of the most influential members of the British government is saying that the individual and the country that's been fighting so bravely against this appalling invader who's committed war crimes now has to potentially capitulate in the hope that Putin will cease bombing them. So and most people say this is outrageous against all natural justice. The position of Mandelson, and you have to assume this is therefore the position of Downing Street and Starmer, is that this is the reason for saying this is because this is completely consistent with what Trump has been asking Zelensky to do. This is, to go back to what I say, this is Trump's peace deal. The position of the British government is that there is a deal here to be done. If you flatter him enough, he will ultimately give the guarantee that I've described: intelligence, air cover, and long-range missile technology. But what you have to do is swallow all your pride, eat nothing but humble pie, tell President Trump that he's brilliant and deserves the Nobel Peace Prize, and then maybe you get something that you can just about live with, at enormous cost to Europe, by the way, because we're all spending vastly more on our defence and at the potential cost of European lives if Putin were to break this agreement. We are in a new, I think we've got this whole issue about the security of Europe, but broader than that, we are in this astonishingly frightening new world. It is now possible to actually understand what sort of the new Trumpism is. And it is a rolling back of both globalization and, the convention that since the Second World War, that America was prepared to commit its resources to protecting other democracies, because this was the assumption in Washington, that if you had global stability and free trade, America would get richer. Trump doesn't believe any of that. He thinks that the way to make America richer is to do shabby deals with the likes of Putin and Xi. Doesn't really care about democracies anywhere else, doesn't really care about lives anywhere else. He cares about American lives and American prosperity. Now, there are plenty of people who would say that his approach will ultimately make America poorer. Doesn't matter. This is a new world order of great leaders, and if you want to get something out of a great leader, which Starmer plainly does, you've got to play by their rules. Some people call it the new global gangsterism, and I think there's something to that.
Can I ask you all finally, Emma, you first. It has been a remarkable weekend. I think most people who have been sitting at home from Friday onwards, digesting the scenes they saw in the White House, I think a lot of people in the UK were pretty horrified by what they saw, shocked, whatever word you want to use. But certainly, as Robert was saying, there is this dawning realization that the world has changed. We're in a totally new era. America cannot be relied upon in terms of our defense. Maybe it never could. Maybe that was a delusion. But we are not in that world anymore. Can I just ask you all, what's your sort of personal reaction to it? And I mean that in a sort of analytical sense. We're all trying to make sense of it analytically, but we're all human beings and we're looking at it and thinking, wow, I never thought I'd live to see this.
I'm just struck by Robert's comment about global gangsterism. I mean, that is quite a assessment, isn't it? And quite a reality. When I was watching the press conference on Friday, all I could think was that, for all these years, Zelensky has known where the battleground was. He's been watching maps. He's been watching Russian encroachments into Ukraine. He's been losing territory. He's been aware of where the threats are. He's counted them. He's taken a bit of territory here. He's got this back there. He went to America. That was meant to be safe ground. And that was where he saw his greatest attack of all his presidency. And quite how he comes back from that, awful to watch. Yes, a lot of people will have thought it was absolutely unpalatable. And a lot of people will have thought, he got what he deserved. And I think that's what's really concerning about this, that actually what President Trump is doing and J.D. Vance and this new administration is that they are saying the things that so many people have thought but haven't dared vocalise. And they are giving voice to this, and that makes for very dangerous times, very, very dangerous times.
Dan, what have you been thinking this weekend as you've contemplated the scenes on Friday night?
It was just the extraordinary kind of departure from all of the norms that we've known when it comes to foreign policy and America. I mean, we had a signal in the United Nations with America voting with Russia over a resolution on Ukraine. Unbelievable. That got kind of slightly missed in the tsunami of other things that were happening in the last few days. But that was an early warning sign. And then that incredible scene in the Oval Office. We were actually watching a live transcription of what was happening coming in, a sort of one of these AI transcriptions. So we were just getting all the words appearing on our phones. And it wasn't very clear who was saying what, because it was, sort of speaker one, speaker two. But it was clear that there was an argument going on. I couldn't quite believe what I was reading. And I thought, this can't be President Trump saying this. I couldn't make head or tail of it to begin with. I thought it must, I didn't understand what was going on. And then we saw the pictures, and it was even worse than we dared imagine. There was a moment where President Trump, pushed President Zelensky's shoulder. It sort of almost came to blows. It certainly came to physical blows. I've never seen anything like this in international diplomacy. I'm sure none of you have either. Whether, behind the scenes things get this heated, of course they probably do. But to do this in front of the world's media did feel like a deliberate ambush. But it was President Zelensky's reaction as well. I mean, some will argue that he rose to that baiting by J.D. Vance, and that then resulted in this kind of explosive reaction from President Trump. And it's difficult to see where his presidency, Zelensky's presidency, goes from here, whether he can survive politically now with this such fractured relationship with President Trump, or whether this is the beginning and the end of his leadership of Ukraine through this terrible war.
Robert, final words to you.
Well, I've talked already about how I think, the so-called global architecture that we've been used to since the Second World War has been destroyed, and that we're in this new world of, these strong men who think they can do what they like. And it's quite interesting to me, just as part of that actually Trump currently, I have to say, seems more hostile to Zelensky than he does to President Xi. In fact, weirdly, he's doing quite a lot of stuff that looks to me to be sort of building bridges with China, and we've talked about the way he's built, shockingly, and some would say, bridges with Putin. On a narrower point close to home, just having been at Lancaster House for this summit of European leaders, also we had Trudeau from Canada there, convened by Keir Starmer. There is something significant here for the UK, which is that the UK, because of this crisis, is back in the European family. Right? It was very interesting to see the way that European leaders were showing respect, cordiality to Starmer. And not saying in any sense, we're back in the European Union, but it is quite clear that Starmer is comfortable in showing collective solidarity. This is the first time we've really seen this from a UK leader since Brexit, and they are very comfortable with him. And he's also doing something that I think is really quite impressive. Obviously, talked about the widespread shock and outrage at the way that Trump and Vance disrespected President Zelensky. But Starmer has resisted the temptation to manifest that kind of shock and outrage. He knows that for the benefit of the UK, and the benefit of, you've got to have a dialogue with Trump. To an extent, you've got to play by his rules. And I have to say, I think this is the most impressive that I've seen Starmer since he became Prime Minister. I think, he is currently, it's still relatively early days, but he's managing this crisis in a sensitive and very grown-up way. And for now, we should probably be grateful for that.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. If you've joined us to sit through this deeply sobering analysis session from three of our best minds, I'm grateful for your time. It's certainly given me a lot of food for thought. Not necessarily massively optimistic food for thought, but food for thought nevertheless. Thank you very much indeed for being with us.